Okay, we'll go ahead and get kicked off. Hey everybody, thanks for joining. Anybody else who wants to join can sort of trickle in as we go, but thanks for taking the time to join us tonight. Really appreciate it. I am David York. I am the tech employer specialist for the Central Kentucky area, but I also do a lot with remote work. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk and meet some of our wonderful participants. So before we get to the speaker tonight, there are a couple things. So we do have some other speakers coming up. Next week, we actually have Black Hat Hacking with Charles Kaiser. It's actually going to be a live demo. Should be pretty interesting. Knows quite a bit about the subject, sort of demystifying what that means. And then after that, we're going to be doing a talk on coding with emerging technologies in finance with Karen Russo. But tonight, we also have something on finance. So tonight, we have a speaker from Truist, which is a bank holdings company, if you're not familiar with them, but likely you are. They're quite big. Our speaker is Kirby Stormont. She is a business information security manager at Truist. Knows quite a bit on the subject of mitigating cyber threats in the financial sector. So that's what we're going to be talking about is Fintech tonight. In general, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions or anything like that, you can definitely ask them in the chat, but prefer that you use the Q&A function. It makes it way easier for us to keep track of them. You can also come off mute and ask stuff when appropriate. So I'll stop talking and I'll turn it over to Kirby.
Awesome. Thank you, David. I appreciate the intro. Let me get my slides up. Let's see. Are you able to see the slide deck, David?
I can see the call right now, but not the slide deck.
Okay. Let's see. Sorry. We use Microsoft Teams and not Google Meet. So apologies. Okay, what about now? Can you see a slide deck?
Yep, just came up.
Okay, awesome. So hi, everyone. As David mentioned, my name is Kirby Stormont. I work for Truist Financial. So if you're familiar with SunTrust or BB&T, those are the two banks that merged to form Truist Financial December of 2019. So we're coming up on year 5 of being legally Truist one bank. So huge merger, a lot of merger activities, and it's been a very exciting time to be in the financial industry. A little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about, give you a quick intro into who I am. We'll touch on some phishing and vishing. We'll go through cyber certifications and some domains, and then wanted to do a little bit of a dive into some of the cyber domains that are really applicable in any industry, but especially the financial industry, and also just really good domains that are going to be applicable regardless of what company you look at. These three you're going to see them everywhere. So wanted to touch on those a little bit tonight with you all. So intro to who I am. I went to UGA in Athens and graduated with a degree in management information systems. I graduated and moved to DC and started my career up there working for EY. So I was doing consulting originally in the risk advisory practice. So that contains internal, like IT, general controls testing, a lot of SOX and COSO testing, and being internal or external audit for our clients from an IT perspective. So heavily focused on risk mitigation, and basically the core of everything that I've been doing since I graduated is always from a risk management approach. So we'll talk about that a little bit through this whole presentation. So a risk-based approach is something that you'll continuously hear with everything that involves cybersecurity. It's pretty much the core of what we do, and the basis of why we do everything is to manage risk. So you'll hear that concept talked about a lot in cybersecurity. Like I mentioned, I work for Truist. I moved to Atlanta about 6 years ago. And so now live here with my husband and dog, and we have a baby on the way. So a lot of life changes coming up. And I am in the business information security officer space. So definitely a mouthful. Every bank has their own variety of what they call their cybersecurity department. But at its most basic level, my job and my peer group, we are the touch point between every cybersecurity domain at Truist and all of our lines of business and technical teams that we support. So with that being said, I personally support enterprise functions. So that is everything that makes the bank a company and not specifically a bank. I'm not client facing, I'm internal facing. Everyone that I support are teams like our legal teammates or chief of staff to our C-suite or HR or finance or fraud. So all the backend functions that really make Truist function as a company, and removing the financial piece of dealing with clients' money or wholesale banking or investment banking. So for our first topic, phishing and vishing, huge topic these days in cybersecurity, especially in the
Kirby, if you don't mind, we actually can't see your slides progress.
Oh,
there we go. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're good. Can you see this slide?
Yes, phishing and vishing. Yep, that's
Okay,
what we're
I'll
on.
keep it on this view, I guess. I don't know if when I went into presenter mode, it made it a little wonky.
Google Meet can be strange about that.
Sounds good. It might also be user error. So let me know if I need to progress the slides further. So for phishing and vishing, I assume most people have heard about phishing. At this point, vishing is a newer term. So phishing is when you get a fraudulent email or message that basically is a man-in-the-middle attack when a malicious user is trying to get the end user to click on a link and either embed malware on their device or get them to introduce and put in their personal data, and if they think they're sending it to a secure source and it's actually going to a malicious user. So phishing is something that has definitely been around for a long time, but it's not going anywhere. And so that's why I always like to mention it, because it seems at this point, because it's been around for so long, that it might it feels outdated almost to talk about phishing, but it's still such a real threat. And specifically when you're talking about the financial industry, there's, especially with the amount of people that online bank and almost exclusively online bank these days, there's a lot of different ways that bad actors can attack. And so we always like to talk about phishing because it's involving your money. And when you bank with someone, you want to make sure that your money, your data, your information is as secure as it can be, and that we are doing everything that we can to secure that information. And so with phishing, an example of what an attack you might get is say you bank with bank A or whatever. You might get a text message saying, urgent, please go to the link below. Your data's been compromised. We need you to update your password, or something that gives a sense of urgency or some sort of immediate action to really put you on high alert to say, I do want my money to be protected. I want my data to be protected, and give you that sense of urgency to where you maybe aren't thinking through all of the different potential outcomes, which is totally fair. And that's why it's such a popular attack. So I always like to talk about phishing, but one of the new ones that has come up and is really prevalent these days is vishing. So it's voice phishing. Not the most creative names out there, but it has really taken over in the financial industry as a threat to end users, because there's a lot of attacks that can happen via vishing. So it is easy to see how an actor can basically simulate a real user by a message. The voice aspect of it is a little trickier, but the technology is getting really good at simulating a bad actor or simulating a company to be a bad actor. And so that's something to also look out for. Truist does a lot of training simulations and a lot of teammate awareness around phishing, but more specifically vishing these days, just to make sure that everyone is very well versed in this potential threat. And so that's something that, regardless of what company you work with or what industry you work with, these are most likely going to be trainings that they push out to teammates, but it's always something to really keep in mind. And specifically being a bank and in the financial industry, it's always top of mind. So there's a lot of awareness that comes through it. And just it can be something as easy as clicking on a link in an email, and it just does so much damage. And so it's really, really important to have a lot of really good training about ways to mitigate the risk of phishing and vishing. You never can mitigate risk 100%. That's why it's risk. It's at its most basic definition, just something that has the chance of happening. And so what we can do from a cybersecurity perspective is really raise awareness, raise training around certain situations like phishing and vishing or other different types of attacks. I mean, there's a laundry list of attacks that are out there for malicious users to try and get information out of someone. So we can chat offline about that if you ever want to, because there's a lot, but awareness is everything and it's such a crucial part of it. So part of the risk management strategy is a lot of training and focus on this. That was a lot of me talking about this. Are there any questions before we move on to the next slide?
I guess I'm just curious if, like, have you seen artificial intelligence creating an uptick in this, like artificially created voices and phishing attacks and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can't speak to the Truist instance specifically because I'm not on the phishing and vishing team to see like the breakdown of actually what we see. But from just an industry perspective, definitely AI has been able to really enhance and mature the phishing and vishing attacks. And so because of like all the deep fake stuff and a lot of the stuff that AI is able to do now so easily and really push out a lot of fake information out there quickly, it definitely has played into it. So if you're interested in phishing and vishing or AI, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of really interesting research that comes out over the next however many years because of how far AI has come. Because I mean, AI has been around for a really long time, but it just recently became available to the masses. And so you didn't have your chat GPT 10 years ago, but companies were still using AI and AI was still out there. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff too from a risk management perspective around AI that will be coming down the pike. So for example, the EU just passed a law, I believe earlier this year, maybe end of last year, introducing a risk framework for how to deal with AI in the corporate world, which GDPR, if that's a familiar term for you, that is around like data protection and privacy in the EU. And once the EU rolled it out, the US then came up with similar data privacy frameworks. And from a risk perspective, if you're a publicly traded company, you have like external auditors will come in and basically give you a score against this framework and see if you have the proper security controls in place. And so one thing that the GDPR regulation in the EU, subsequently followed by the US's more stringent regulations, really helped was give that framework around how companies should properly handle data privacy controls. So the US hasn't published a framework yet for AI, but that will come and will follow. So once that happens, then companies will have a risk framework of how to manage AI in a secure and more patterned way. Because right now, I mean, there's companies that use AI. I don't know if anyone has used like Microsoft Copilot is a Microsoft product that they roll out to a lot of different companies. And it's widely used in Microsoft, but it's an AI tool that companies are using. But right now, there's just not a standard framework out there. And we'll talk about frameworks in a little bit, but AI is something that definitely has a lot of room for growth in the framework perspective. So I think in the coming years, it'll only get more prevalent and more ironed out. And that will just continue to grow as companies and individual users use AI more and more, and the capabilities of AI expand for just someone in any industry, not financial specific. So That's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, you probably got more of an answer than you expected. So sorry about that. Okay. So cyber certifications, these aren't specific necessarily to the financial industry, but depending on the industry that you're in, there are more applicable certifications than others. So for example, like I have the CISSP and the CISA, so the second and third on the list, because my last job I was doing more internal and external audit work, so it's more applicable. And now I'm doing more straightforward cybersecurity work on a daily basis. So the information security system professional was more of a fit. But I always like to talk about cyber certifications because in the cybersecurity industry, things are so rapidly changing, and there are so many facets of cybersecurity. I feel like sometimes people hear cybersecurity and think that that describes one job that is out there. And if you do cybersecurity at one company, it's going to look very similar to how cybersecurity is at a different company. And it's just so vague. It's like an athlete saying they play sports. It's like, yeah, you might play a sport, but like there's a ton of different sports, different levels, all the different different classifications. So certifications are a really, really awesome way to get plugged into the cyber community and really hone your skills and make you very marketable when you're applying for jobs or applying for a promotion internally, or just to really expand your skill set. So, I mean, if you Google cybersecurity certifications, you'll see how many of them there are. But I just wanted to pull some of the most applicable ones to just a classic cybersecurity job that you typically see out in the working world. The CompTIA Security Plus is a really awesome one. Lots of people use that as their starting base for their certifications. It's a little easier to manage in terms of the study time is less, the test is not quite as dense, but it gives you a really awesome base of cybersecurity at a holistic view. CISSP goes into a little more detail and is just a little more time consuming. And then if you really want to get into cloud security, the CCSP is a really great one to do because it focuses just on cloud. But lots of cloud let me back up. With cloud, there's a lot of opportunity in the cybersecurity space because lots of companies if you're working for a big company, they have a lot of legacy applications. So legacy applications mean applications that have been there forever, and you might have one person at the company that still needs that application for a certain reason, or you might have one process that's still reliant on this one application, but everything else has been merged to a new application. So most companies, if they're not a startup or have not started in the past 5 to 10 years, will have a mix of on-prem. So it's on-premise is what that stands for. Applications, which means they are hosted on a server that is a physical server in either a data lake, a shared data server room, or just a physical location, or applications that are hosted on the cloud. So with an application that's hosted on the cloud, that means that you have your servers in the cloud or you're hosting on someone else's servers that are in the cloud. So there's no physical infrastructure that you're actually having to manage. And so lots of companies are moving more and more to the cloud. So that is always a good one, especially for longevity about prospects of jobs, job prospects. There are only going to be more and more jobs that focus on cloud security, for example, and especially as the frameworks and risk management around cloud controls expand, that will only increase more jobs around it. So cloud is always something that I like to mention because it's going to be around for a long time. And it's also something that still people don't necessarily have the expertise in because it's not there aren't many majors out there in college these days for specifically cloud security. If you get a cybersecurity degree, it's covering your on-prem, it's covering your cloud, it's covering all these other different things. But that's why certifications are so cool. So if you find an area that you're really interested in, you can dive as deep as you want into it. You can stay as broad as you want, but also think there is value in specializing to some extent, especially in cyber, because there's a lot of information out there. And so there's a little bit of it, kind of a little bit of anything out there for anyone of what you want if you're interested in cyber. And then the last one about the information security manager, this one's all about how to run a security program. So as you progress in your career and you get more into the management level, this is a really awesome one that talks about how to run a security program. I honestly think it can benefit anyone at any level because it is something that it talks about how to create a cyber program. And I think anyone at any level can contribute to that. You don't have to be a C-suite level executive to contribute to a successful program. I think it maybe is more beneficial if everyone at every level understands that to really understand the collective goals. So a lot of really good certifications out there. And specifically, like from a financial perspective, there are industry specific certifications, but lots of these that I've listed here and lots of the like main cyber certifications that you'll see out there are industry agnostic, because cyber from industry to industry, yes, will be a little more tailored towards the specific industry, but at its base level, it's pretty agnostic because you have a control framework. You're going to have those risk-based approach practices embedded in your cyber department, regardless of industry. So if you want to be a developer or an architect and you're really interested in AWS, for example, there's an AWS architecture certification out there, or it can get really specific. So if you're interested in cybersecurity and you have a specific realm or job in mind, I highly recommend looking at the certifications that are in the job posting or that are applicable to that job, and seek those out, because it'll only make you a stronger candidate the more information that you have. And a lot of people that you meet in cyber, there's some people that just love getting certs. And so they'll have 8 certs after their name and their email signature. And then other people will have 1 or none. So it just really depends on what fits your style. But there's a lot of really good information out there and a lot of really good certs that you can get. So wanted to touch on that. Any questions before we move on to cyber domains?
Yes, indeed. Pardon me, Kirby.
Yeah.
David, are we recording?
Yes, we are.
Oh, good. All right. That was my question. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me
making
after too. If you have any specific questions, we can always chat about it. I'm around. So just wanted to throw that out there too. Okay, so for the purpose of this talk, wanted to dive into the CISSP certification domains, because from a cybersecurity perspective, this certification is one of the most widely sought out ones. And so this gives you a good overview at what the main domains are within a cybersecurity program. Not to say that this is all encompassing of every cybersecurity program at every financial institution, nor are these going to be the exact breakdowns. Every company can handle it differently. And Truist, we, looking at this, handle it roughly like this, but it's not a one-to-one match. Everyone has a slightly different name and way they organize, but this gives you a really good high level at what the main domains are from a cybersecurity perspective. It ranges everywhere from physical security to asset security to network security. But as you can see, a common theme through the 8 domains is security is in most of them. And if security is not in them, it's actually the only 2 that are not. Architectural engineering is all security focused, because the way you architect your solutions is always mapped up against your controls at the company. And so security is top of mind there. And then with identity and access management, we're going to touch on it more in the next slide, but it's all about access security and making sure that every single person at the bank or at the company has proper access, and that the security around your roles and entitlements from an access perspective are managed and properly handled, because there can be a lot of damage done if those aren't handled properly. So we're going to dive into 3 of these. They're not the three most important by any means. They're just three that I think are really applicable from a financial industry perspective, but also for other industries, and also have a lot of growth opportunities within them. So it's a lot of really good, there are a lot of really good spaces if you maybe are interested in cybersecurity, but don't necessarily know where to start because it is very daunting. There's a lot going on and there's just a lot of different options. So these are three really good ones to maybe get your foot in the door with cyber if you want to read more about them and just learn more about cybersecurity. Highly, highly recommend these three. So our first one is identity and access management. So this was where I got my foot in the door with cybersecurity back when I was working at EY. And I am very biased, I imagine, because it is where I started in cyber, but I think it is an extremely important pillar of a cybersecurity program. If you don't know who has access to your systems and how you manage that access, there can be a lot of damage done. And so everything at like its core of managing your assets and applications comes down to who has access to them. So definitely very biased about IAM, but there's a lot of jobs that you can do in IAM. IAM departments typically are pretty big, and you can also get really specialized in the technical aspect or the business aspect. When I was working in IAM consulting, I was the business lead, so I was not the one actually connecting the applications at the company or at the client to the IAM tool. I was doing like business process flow and a lot of process management and more high-level business requirements. So I'm not a developer. I most likely will never be a developer. And there's a space for me in IAM. So you can kind of get whatever you want out of it, depending on the level of technical you are / want to be. And so with IAM, the whole objective of it is to protect company data and systems from unauthorized access. So at the end of the day, it goes back to our risk-based approach that we've talked about, where everything you do, you're trying to mitigate risk. And so if you have a handle on who has access to all of your assets, you can then add on more controls on top of that to limit access to make sure people don't have excess access. For example, like you don't want someone who is an intern and has no idea what they're doing on day one to be able to go into the payroll system, bump their salary up to $300,000 with a crazy bonus. Like that's just something you don't want to do. And so having a handle on the access is really important, which obviously that might be a more extreme example, but it still is something that you want to make sure that your users have the appropriate amount of access to the right assets rather than just giving everyone at the company access to everything, because then that gets very chaotic, hard to track down if something happens, who performed the bad action, or if there's any kind of outside attack, having your access really locked down helps mitigate that risk. So there are a lot of IAM tools out there. If you Google IAM products, the top ones you'll probably see are SailPoint, Savient, Oracle Identity Manager. Those are three of the top ones that come to mind. They're all good. They all have their pros and cons, different features, but say your company uses SailPoint. The purpose of an IAM solution is to centralize all of your access management into one location. So at your end state, say you're a company with 10 applications. In the real world, that's really low. Most companies have upwards of 100 plus. But say you're a company, you have 10 applications and you onboard this tool, SailPoint, to your environment, and that's going to be your IAM tool. The end goal is have all 10 of those applications integrated into your IAM tool. So instead of going to application 1 through 10 to look at who has access in your company to that application and to see what their level of access is, you can do all that through that one tool. So if you're using SailPoint, for example, you would log into SailPoint and you'd be able to see the breakdown of everyone's access to all those 10 applications. So it does a really good job at centralizing access and puts it in a really user-friendly way, which is very important, because if you don't have a handle on who has access to your systems, There's a lot of dangerous things that can happen, or if something dangerous does happen, you can't really triage the issue. And so this gives you good visibility into it, but also really helps future attacks or prevent future attacks because you can make sure that your access is properly provisioned. And so that is always extremely helpful. Part of what an IAM tool does is it helps with giving access to users, but also almost just as important as giving access is removing access. So you have a teammate that leaves the company, maybe on unsavory terms. Having a proper IAM procedure in place means that when that user is terminated, their access to the whole network is shut off. Their access to all applications that they previously had access to is removed. So if someone maybe ended on a less than great note, they can't retaliate and perform, like they can't pay themselves more than they should, or they can't do any damage as a malicious user, because at that point, you want to make sure that their access is totally shut off. So it gives you really good visibility into all access management across the board. But in specific use, like you'll have different use cases of the user journey. And so like in this graphic, you'll see, like if you focus on the users piece, the scripts you can kind of automate. But from a user perspective, if you have a teammate that needs access to an application or data, but say an application, IAM can help you with getting them enrolled, to showing what they need, like what access they need, actually provisioning them, which means giving them the access, updating, say someone is at a company for 2 years and then transfers into a different department, you'd want to update their access, because say if you're an accountant and you move to cybersecurity, you're going to need access to different things. And so having an IAM tool that can help update those access, or that access from all the applications that they needed when they were in accounting to all the applications that they're going to need when they're in cybersecurity, that's a crucial part of IAM as well. And then say at the end of that life cycle, that teammate decides to leave, goes, gets another job, you'll need to deprovision all that access. So the IAM tool is really good about looking at that full user life cycle and helping manage along the way. One thing too that you'll hear a lot with IAM is access reviews. So with an access review, most companies do it on a quarterly basis. Some do it on a biannual, some do it on an annual. It just depends on which application and what the criticality of it is. There's a lot of just analysis that goes into that, and it's up to cybersecurity leadership to determine that. But say you're doing an access review, what that means is, say it's on a quarterly basis, the manager of whichever application is onboarded to this IAM tool, they will get a report showing all of the users that have access to that application, the roles that they have. So basically like the access levels that they have. And it says, can you go and certify every single user in here? So they'll go line by line to say, yep, this person's good. Nope, this person needs this access removed, and so on and so forth. And so then they do that 4 times a year. So that helps stay on top of data cleanup to where you don't have a lot of stale data in the system with excess access. So quarterly access reviews, or just access reviews in general, are really important. And that from a cybersecurity perspective is what we call a control. And so having user access reviews properly done and managed is a type of cybersecurity control to help make sure that the security from that perspective holds up. So controls and controls, risk-based approach, and like a risk mitigation strategy are all terms that you'll hear used in the same conversation. It's kind of 2 sides of the, like you have the risk-based approach, and the output of that are having security controls on your system. So as you learn more about cyber, or you're doing a lot of reading, or like getting a certification, you'll continue to keep coming across those terms. And that's central to everything that we do. So always like to note that too, because it's just something that will always be top of mind. And then the last 2 bullets for connected applications and disconnected applications. The last 2 points I want to make from an IAM perspective is these 2 points. So if you have a connected application, that means that your application is fully onboarded and connected to your IAM tool. So say we're using SailPoint. and you have an application that your company's used for 10 years, if it's fully connected to SailPoint, that means you can go into SailPoint directly, add a user, remove access from a user, change their access. You can do everything with the user lifecycle all within SailPoint, which helps because then it means that SailPoint and the application that you're managing the access for are fully connected. And so there's no lapse in access between what SailPoint is saying you have versus what that user actually has. Disconnected is where it gets a little trickier because it involves more of a human element, because for whatever reason, there are some applications that just cannot be connected to certain IAM tools, whether that's they're older and so the technology doesn't exist to actually connect it. There might be a business use case as to why certain applications, like the business doesn't want to connect them to the IAM tool. There's a variety of reasons of why that might happen, but those get thrown into a bucket called disconnected applications. So what it does is basically you can see all the access in your SailPoint tool or whichever IAM tool you're using, but you can't actually change the actual access that a user has in the application. That all has to be done directly in the application. And so there you can have a disconnect between what the access is saying it is versus what's actually there. So you'll see those two terms tossed around a lot. The obvious preference is connected applications to make sure everything's cohesive and you remove that human element. But yet again, you can't have that all the time. So disconnected applications is a pattern that's within IAM. So you'll see that sometimes too. Before we move on to our next domain, does anyone have any questions about IAM? Okay. It's also, there's a ton of literature out there around IAM and a lot of trainings and a lot of good material out there. So if you are interested in IAM, I highly recommend looking into it. It's only going to grow with all of the company. I mean, what was it, last year, 2 years ago, when all the companies were slashing their budgets, basically like cybersecurity budgets weren't being slashed, and IAM departments are only growing as access gets more complex and more important as companies have a larger application portfolio. So there's a lot of good growth opportunity in IAM. So always think it's just going to be around for a while, and it's a really good domain. So highly recommend.
We actually do have a question before we move on. Jonathan Shercliffe has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so with disconnected applications, you can't track them with the tools. What is the kind of standard practice in that case? Like throw it on an Excel sheet and just kind of manually follow up on users' computers, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's called a flat file approach. So basically, for that disconnected application on whatever cadence the business and the technology teams decide on, say it's quarterly still, on a quarterly basis, the application owner of that disconnected application will provide a flat file. So pretty much an export of all the access in that application to the IAM team. And then the IAM team will marry that up with the IAM tool. So say it's SailPoint, they'll take that flat file, put it into IAM, and that will then match up all of the user data against the roles that are in the system. So it's more of a manual process, and it requires the flat file from the application team be sent to the IAM team, and then have that flat file be uploaded into your IAM tool. So it's definitely not as immediate, and especially with terminations, that's where you see the biggest risk, I think, from my perspective, because if you have a user that, say they get terminated on January 15th, but the flat file was just provided to the IAM team on January 1. If you don't have another control in place to trigger getting that flat file sent to the IAM team with every termination, the IAM team is not going to expect a flat file until the beginning of Q2. So then you have that 2.5 month lag. So that's where you get additional security controls built on top of like just the quarterly access review, for example, to trigger review anytime there's a new user or a terminated user. And the controls, depending on where, like which company you're at and how mature their program is, it can get really, really granular and really get to the level of what happens every time a user is terminated. These are the 20 different actions that need to be taken, for example. Or if you have a less mature control set up, your framework might have 2 controls around it to say when an employee is fired or terminated, these 2 actions need to happen. So your control framework can really get very, very intricate and detailed very quickly. And the more controls, if they're done the right way, only just secures your company more and more. Because if you're having more security controls around them, it means you're just looking at the security side a little more closely. But the disconnected applications are always top of mind when you're looking at security for an IM program, just because there is not that automated piece. So that's a great question.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? I know we're coming down to like 15 minutes, so I want to make sure we have some time at the end for other questions too. So with vulnerability management, this is another hot topic item that you'll hear a lot about from cyber. Most companies, if not all companies, have some sort of vulnerability management in place. The way that they execute that is, it can vary. There's not a one size fits all. It depends on your environment. It depends on what kind of applications you have, your industry. It just really is so variable. But 3 of the most prevalent types of security testing that are out there across the board for larger companies are the 3 that are on the screen. So DAST, SAST, and pen test is what you'll hear them commonly referred to as. With dynamic scanning, so DAST, the first one on the screen, that scans your web interfaces. So it can scan your pre-prod or your prod environments. But basically what it does, there's tools out there. So if you're interested in any of these specific types of scans, if you Google like dynamic application security testing products or tools, it'll spit out all the different ones that are on the market. And they all work slightly in their own way, but roughly at their core, they scan the web interfaces for vulnerabilities. So if you have an application that you can access from Google Chrome, for example, that is a candidate for being onboarded to one of these tools to scan for vulnerabilities. So some common vulnerabilities that you'll see from these scans are SQL injection and a lot of cross-site scripting or like end-of-life software, to where that means basically like the software that the website used to build it is no longer supported. So it's not getting consistent security updates pushed out. So if you're interested in vulnerability management, you could research this forever. There's so much you can do with it. There's a lot of really, really cool stuff that's happening in the vulnerability management space, specifically around like vulnerability detection. And a lot of where that comes into play, especially with a lot of startups these days too, and a lot of cloud-based products that are just more in the startup space, is where you'll see a lot of like SAST, so the static application testing. There's a lot of cool products out there that are doing interesting things with SAST scanning. This type of scanning covers your source code. And so it's at its base level. When you have your source code for an application, these type of tools go in and scan that code to see which type of vulnerabilities could be exploited from a hacker. And so there's some products out there that are like development products, to where as you're writing your code, it's going ahead and scanning for vulnerabilities. So before you even push it to your production environment, it'll give you flags to say like, hey, you might want to check like lines 68 through 70. There's something fishy there. A SQL injection attack can happen if you publish this. So it's kind of doing development and remediation all in one go. So a lot of really interesting stuff too. If you are interested in this space, highly recommend looking into SAST tools out there. Just a lot of really cool stuff. But they scan for source code. A lot of the same vulnerabilities that exist from a DAST perspective are also vulnerabilities that can exist from a SAST perspective, because the vulnerabilities across the board, like SQL injection or cross-site scripting, are code vulnerabilities at its core. But these just test like the SAST is from the source code, and the DAS is the like external web facing view. So just different ways attackers can get in and cause chaos. And then the third is penetration testing. So a pen test is where you'll have a cybersecurity team or expert come in and they will try and exploit as many vulnerabilities in an application or in a system. And it's basically to identify the weak spots in your application. So say for your login screen, there's a weakness to where an attacker, if they wanted to, could do a SQL injection attack and then get into your system. Your pen test, if they're a good pen test team, is going to pick up on that, and that'll be in the report. So pen testing is very manual because it requires a team to go in and really try everything because they're just trying to find the weaknesses in the system. It's not like they're just scanning the source code for patterns that are out there, but pen testing can be extremely effective in finding vulnerabilities. So these are the top 3 that you'll typically hear about. It's definitely not limited to the entire vulnerability management catalog. There's a lot out there. And so if this is something that interests you, there's a lot of stuff that you can learn and a lot of trainings out there around vulnerability management. And this in general, like IAM, is only growing as well as hackers become more mature and more well-versed in attacks, as well as the introduction of AI. And so making sure that from a company perspective, or say you own your own business, you want to have a really good handle on the weaknesses in your system, because if you don't know those, you might have malicious activity happening without you even knowing it. And so having a really good handle on the weaknesses in your system to where you can patch those or update your code to mitigate that risk is extremely helpful. So vulnerability management, super important, will be important, I think, forever in cybersecurity. And yet again, just ties back into the risk-based approach because as a program, you most likely will rate your assets from the most risky to the least risky. The verbiage around it will change. Every company doesn't use the same wording to determine that, but most companies have a rating to some extent. And so that helps prioritize which assets you scan and how you handle those from a vulnerability perspective. Any questions before we touch on our last domain? Okay, so our last domain is software development. So you'll hear it referred to as the software development lifecycle, or SDLC, because that is a mouthful. So the SDLC is a whole method of consistently changing and updating your software or developing your software from day one. And it puts a framework in place to make sure that every single piece of software and every single application that's going through development follows the same process. So yet again, risk-based approach. This helps mitigate risk to make sure teams aren't just doing what they feel like doing when they're developing an application. And there's a process that they follow to make sure that as they're writing code and as they're building out an application, they're thinking about the security aspect and they're thinking about which controls your company has in place, for example, and making sure that those are built into the application rather than building this shiny new application, releasing it into your production environment, and then realizing there's 15 security holes and having to go back and iterate. It makes the process have a more security focused mindset from the beginning, which a lot of trainings and a lot of certifications as you go through it really focus on having cybersecurity and technology embedded from the get-go. In the past, that necessarily hasn't always been the case. It's been a lot, especially because cybersecurity is a relatively new field compared to some of the other fields in technology, that there's a lot of tech out there that existed before cybersecurity frameworks were around. And so there's a lot of efforts to take the cybersecurity frameworks and overlay that on your existing infrastructure. But now a lot of SDLC work is focused on embedding the cybersecurity controls as you're developing to really help make sure that cybersecurity is a focus and just integrated as part of your application rather than an afterthought. So a common theme as you do any kind of research or reading within cybersecurity, it'll talk about making sure that cybersecurity is really focused on in the development phase and not an afterthought, because it was an afterthought for so long when it really wasn't a framework. So that's something that the software development lifecycle focuses on. But a lot of it's just really good proper change management, which change management pretty much means making sure that when you put a change in place, you follow a standard process. There are certain sign-offs and controls that your team, regardless of which team you are, follow to make sure that it's standardized and to make sure that you're releasing secure products out there. And so a proper SDLC program can really help make sure that you do standardize this process to then mitigate risk. So you don't have someone going rogue, creating this really maybe awesome product, but it might be the riskiest thing in your whole portfolio. So it really ensures that you have the risk management mindset as you go through the process, to make sure that as you're developing new and cool tools at your company, you're doing it in a proper way that keeps security in mind, to really help. I mean, in any industry, definitely in the financial industry, but I mean, any industry will want to secure data. But from a cyber perspective, it's always something that we really try and focus on, and making sure that you have the proper gating controls and you have the proper controls in place as you're developing. So you're developing the safest product out there. And specifically in financial industry, it's really important because you're dealing with people's money. And obviously very, very sensitive. And so if your clients can't trust you to secure your data, probably not going to have that many clients. And so you won't be very successful. And so having something that's really like security focused, especially in this day and age, when I feel like every other day you're reading about a new cyber incident where data was sold or a hacker compromised the system and stole a bunch of data. There's constantly stuff in the news about this. And so having a proper SDLC program is one way to help mitigate that risk, and help that your company is not in the news. And so always like to mention this too, because it's, I mean, yes, it's specifically around software, but at this point it's more application focused. So even if you're developing an application for the cloud, you more than likely are going to follow an SDLC process. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as technology delivery lifecycle to make it a little broader. So it's not just focused on your software development, but the same principles still apply. So really interesting topic. There's a lot that goes into it. And there's teams that focus specifically on SDLC lifecycle stuff across a company's whole portfolio. Some companies might specialize and just have like people within each team focus on this. It can be done a million different ways. But having a proper SDLC lifecycle is really, really helpful to help embed those security controls. So with that, 3 minutes left. Sorry, I wanted to add or leave more time, but are there any questions about anything that we talked about or anything we didn't talk about that you want to chat about?
Charles actually has a question.
Yeah.
Could have been a misclick as well. Sometimes you misclick it and it just sort of stays up. So we can come back if that's the
I saw him
case.
come off mute, so I wonder, Charles, are you there? He's going on and off mute, so I think he's having a mic trouble.
Gotcha. I see.
In the meantime, while Charles is figuring that out, I was just kind of curious. You know, we CodeU are a workforce program, and so I'm always interested in industry trends and whatnot. And so cybersecurity can get into a lot of areas, which you've talked about today, but like on-prem solutions versus cloud solutions versus something as specific as like data security, things like that. I'm just kind of curious where you see the industry going, particularly for somebody that is, we're a program geared towards people trying to get their start in the industry. So like, where do you see the big need for talent in, 2-3 years, something like that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is purely my perspective. So take it for what it's worth. But I think IAM has a huge trajectory because companies are realizing how important having access controls are because those haven't really been focused on a lot. And it's not necessarily the sexiest of topics. And so like when you hear like your cyber threat intelligence, your insider threat departments or different things, those just sound cooler, and they are cool. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's going on with that. But I think from a job security and outlook perspective, IAM is a really great place to start. And it also is a really good place to get your foot in the door with a company, see how they operate, because with IAM, you're seeing the start to finish product of their whole application lifecycle and user lifecycle. So it's a really good way to learn a company, but also really learn about different aspects of cyber, because even if you're on an IAM team, you're going to interface with a lot of different cyber teams. You're going to interface with a lot of the business. You're going to interface with a lot of the technical teams. So I think that's huge. Data privacy is another huge one. Data privacy laws aren't that old. There's a lot of new frameworks out there. And so there's a lot of integration of those frameworks into companies' portfolios that need to happen. So there's a ton of work. And I mean, companies are only more like lots of companies are moving to the cloud or moving more of their application portfolio to the cloud, for example. So like cloud security is another huge one. And there's a lot of people that aren't fully specialized in cloud. So if you're a cloud expert, that's huge job security for you. So I think like a lot of data privacy stuff too is a really good way to go. I think those are probably, and vulnerability management, I think also would be a top one. But with a lot of vulnerability management, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with AI for that, or use AI to help with vulnerability management and remediation. I mean, kind of like with AI, yes, it can do a lot, but you still need that human element to validate that the queries are asking the right questions or that the output is actually reasonable and like trustworthy information. You're still going to have that human element. But I think with the first two of like data privacy and cloud security and IAM, I think that to me is the like, not safest bet, but like that's where you'll see a lot of opportunity.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Charles has got his mic fixed, so I'll hand it off to him.
Probably working. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, Kirby.
Hi.
I had a question actually about the software development lifecycle and essentially like what your thoughts are about security in like the lower environments, like dev and test environments versus some of the more strict stuff that, you know, typically you'd see like in the prod environments. I guess my question is how strict does it normally seem in those lower environments in terms of security?
Yeah. So depends on the company. Some companies put more emphasis on pre-prod environments. Some companies focus on prod environments. I personally think that a lot of emphasis should be on the pre-prod environments because everything that eventually moves to your production environment starts in pre-prod. And I'm a big advocate for fix the problem before it's a problem, rather than move it to prod and then need to fix it. But I think it just depends on the company and specifically their outlook on risk mitigation and cybersecurity, because that'll vary everywhere. But if you're at a company with a heavy focus on cyber and specifically like secure development practices, I think you'll probably trend towards seeing a lot more control in your for your pre-prod environments, because then that helps mitigate the risk of pushing vulnerabilities to your prod if you can just secure them before it even makes it to that environment. So I'm always a big proponent of more controls in pre-prod. But that again, depending on the company you're at, that's going to vary and depends on their approach.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. A little vague, but it's always nice to focus on like your production environment's always nice to focus on because those are the vulnerabilities that are out in the world. They're not in a sandbox environment to where it's the safe little protected environment. And so production, you definitely do want to focus on. And especially with like companies that have a lot of legacy applications and a lot of applications that are out there, and then you overlay a security program, there's a lot of emphasis on production, as there should be. But if you are working at a startup, for example, there, I think, should be a lot more focus on pre-prod before you can even get those to your production.
Cool.
Yeah.
So actually with that, we are a few minutes over,
Okay.
so I'll probably go ahead and start wrapping up. It was really great conversation though, and great questions and everything. I really appreciate you speaking for us, Kirby. It was excellent. Again, if you'd like to rewatch this, we will have it on our YouTube in the next day or so. We'll post a link for it. And yeah, thank you all so very much.
Nice. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night. Bye.